It's 1942. America is at war, and someone just decided to build a highway through some of the most brutal wilderness on Earth. 1,700 miles of mountains, permafrost, and subarctic forest. In 8 months. No maps, no towns, no roads. Temperatures that swing 160 degrees between summer and winter. Over 10,000 soldiers, picks, bulldozers, and sheer desperation. The Alaska Highway shouldn't exist. By every reasonable measure, it couldn't be built. But it was. Here's how. Let's go back to where this idea actually started, because the Alaska Highway didn't happen overnight. The dream is older than most people realize. It's the 1920s. Alaska is a U.S. territory, not even a state yet, and completely cut off from the rest of the country by land. No road connects it to the lower 48. The International Highway Association floats the idea of changing that. Representatives from the Yukon, British Columbia, Seattle, Fairbanks, all show up to meetings. Everyone agrees it sounds great, and then nothing happens. President Hoover considers it in 1930. Nothing happens. Then Franklin Roosevelt visits Canada in 1936 and pulls Prime Minister King aside. A highway through Canada to Alaska, Roosevelt says, could be critical if America needs to defend its territory fast. He brings it up again in August of that year in a speech in New York. He raises it again in March 1937, this time putting a number on it. $30 million. The highway would be useful, Roosevelt says, as part of a broader defense against Japan. And still nothing happens. Here's why. Canada doesn't want to pay for it, and honestly, can you blame them? The only part of Canada this highway would run through is the Yukon Territory. A few thousand people. Vast wilderness. No economic upside for Canada at all. So the project sits. For years. Lots of talking, zero building. Then December 7th, 1941. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. And overnight, everything that seemed impractical becomes urgent. Japan is now controlling Pacific shipping lanes. The American supply line to Alaska is suddenly threatened. And Alaska? Isolated. Barely defended. No major road system connecting it to anywhere. A land route to Alaska goes from nice idea to military emergency in about 48 hours. On February 6, 1942, the U.S. Army approves construction of the Alaska Highway. Congressional authorization follows. Roosevelt signs off 5 days later. The whole thing is green-lit in under 2 weeks. Now, the deal with Canada is actually elegant. America pays for everything, every dollar of construction. In return, Canada hands over the land, waives import duties, sales taxes, income taxes, immigration regulations, all of it. After the war ends, the Canadian portion gets handed back to Canada. Clean and simple. From a 20-year-old idea that nobody could get funded to shovels in the ground. In under 2 months. The clock is running, the wilderness is waiting. And nobody has any idea what they're about to walk into. So the highway is approved. Roosevelt has signed off. Canada is on board. Now someone has to figure out where exactly to put it. 5 different routes are on the table, and nobody agrees. The Americans favor a coastal route. It starts at Prince George, runs northwest to Hazleton, follows the Stikine River up toward Whitehorse, and connects through to Fairbanks. Sounds reasonable on paper, but here's the problem. That route is exposed to the Pacific coast. If Japan decides to push further, enemy ships could threaten the entire corridor. It also has brutal elevation grades and some of the heaviest snowfall in North America. Oh, and no airfields anywhere along the way. The Canadians prefer an inland route, shorter by over 200 miles, lower elevations, cheaper to build, cheaper to maintain. Sensible. Neither route wins. The route that gets chosen is selected for one reason above all others. It already has airfields. Stretching from Edmonton, Alberta, all the way up to Fairbanks, Alaska, there's an existing chain of military airstrips called the Northwest Staging Route. And that chain of airfields is doing something critical. It's the pipeline ferrying warplanes to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. Over 8,000 aircraft. That aerial corridor is one of America's most important strategic assets in the entire war. It needs to be protected. It needs to be supplied. So the highway goes there. Decision made. Mid-March 1942, The Army Corps of Engineers starts arriving. The scale is immediate and staggering. Over 10,000 soldiers, 250,000 tons of materials. And rather than starting at one end and building straight through to the other, which would take forever, 7 regiments are posted at strategic intervals along the entire route simultaneously, each one building north and south until they meet in the middle. It's like assembling a puzzle from every piece at once. The method itself is almost primitive in its logic. Surveyors push roughly 10 miles ahead of everyone else, mapping the exact path forward. Behind them, battalions of bulldozers move in and knock down everything in their way. Trees, brush, anything standing, cleared in a swath 50 to 90 feet wide. The men behind the bulldozers follow and clean up the rest. For the first several months, there isn't even much heavy equipment. It's mostly manpower. At one point, a crew improvises a road grader out of timber they cut on the spot, dragged by a single small bulldozer. They are literally building the road with materials from the ground beneath their feet. And then July arrives. In the single month of July, the men build 400 miles of highway. 400 miles in 1 month. The pace is almost impossible to believe, but here's the thing about momentum. The wilderness doesn't care about your timeline. It doesn't care about your war. It doesn't care about Roosevelt's signature or Canada's agreement or the 8,000 planes waiting to use those airfields. The wilderness has its own plans, and it's about to introduce 10,000 soldiers to a very different kind of enemy. Winter hits first. And when winter hits in the Yukon, it doesn't ease you in. It arrives like a wall. Temperatures drop to 60, 70 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Not for a day, for days at a time. The heavy construction vehicles that have been hauled hundreds of miles overland through freezing terrain start breaking down. Axles snap, engines seize, trucks freeze solid where they sit and simply stop being trucks. They become obstacles. The men are working outside in this every day. Then summer flips the entire nightmare upside down. The cold retreats and something almost worse arrives. Dust clouds thick enough to choke visibility. Boggy, waterlogged ground that swallows equipment. And mosquitoes. Not the occasional nuisance kind. Swarms. Dense, relentless, suffocating clouds of them descending on every exposed piece of skin. The temperature swings from 90 degrees Fahrenheit in summer to 70 below in winter. 160 degrees of range. Same location, same road, same men. And then there are the bears. The route cuts directly through some of the most bear-dense habitat on Earth. Grizzlies, black bears, everywhere. The corridor from Dawson Creek through the Yukon and into Alaska runs straight through prime territory for both species. Alaska is one of the few places in the world where all 3 types of North American bear live. And 10,000 soldiers blasting through the forest with heavy machinery, open cooking areas, and mountains of food waste are basically sending out a dinner invitation. Bears showing up at construction camps isn't a funny story the men tell later. It's documented in the archival photos. Multiple images, bears in camp, bears near work sites, bears wandering through the chaos. It's not a rare curiosity, it's a daily reality on top of everything else. But none of that, not the cold, not the insects, not the bears, stops construction completely. The permafrost does. Near the west side of Kluane Lake, the crews hit it. A long stretch of semi-frozen ground that looks solid until you disturb it, and then turns into something closer to soup. The engineers have never dealt with permafrost before. Nobody in the Corps really has. So they try things. The things don't work. They try other things. Those don't work either. Construction grinds to a halt for 6 weeks while they figure it out. 6 weeks, with a war on. Eventually, they find the answer. Corduroy the road surface. Insulate the permafrost layer below so it stays frozen and holds its structure. It's slow, exhausting, and backbreaking, but it's the only option. So that's what they do. And while they're doing it, the news from the Aleutian Islands arrives. June 3rd, 1942. Japan bombs the American military base at Dutch Harbor. Over 100 casualties. 3 days later, Japan invades Attu Island. The day after that, Kiska Island. The enemy is no longer a distant threat somewhere across the Pacific. The enemy is in Alaska. The men working out in that wilderness, fighting permafrost and bears and temperatures that want to kill them, now know exactly what they're racing against, and they start moving faster. Here's something the history books took decades to say clearly. The Alaska Highway was built by approximately 11,000 soldiers. About 4,000 of them were black, organized into 3 newly formed regiments, the 93rd, 95th, and 97th Engineer General Service Regiments. And the story of what they did and what was done to them while they did it is the most important part of this entire project. Start with why they were there at all. By the time the Alaska Highway was approved, nearly every engineer regiment in the U.S. Army was already deployed. The South Pacific was consuming manpower at a staggering rate. So, the War Department made an unusual decision. They would use regiments of African American engineers to fill the gap. Not because of any commitment to equality, because they had run out of other options. What followed was brutal in a way that had nothing to do with the wilderness. Black soldiers were prohibited from entering towns along the route, confined to wilderness assignments. And until the sheer demand for labor overrode the policy, they were banned from operating heavy machinery, under the official belief that they couldn't be trusted with it. So, while white soldiers worked bulldozers and heavy equipment, black soldiers did the same job with picks, shovels, and axes. Same road, same wilderness, same war, worse tools, less recognition. Then there's how some of them got there. The young men of the 93rd Engineers had been living in tents in a swampy, snake-infested corner of Camp Livingston, Louisiana. One day the Army put them on a train. They rode for days. Then they were loaded onto a ship. The ship docked in Skagway, Alaska in April. Freezing, remote, unrecognizable. Nobody had told them where they were going. Nobody had told them why. They stepped off that ship into the subarctic with no real explanation and were handed a shovel. Morale was low. Of course it was. Insufficient equipment, inadequate clothing, long tours with no relief. White officers who offered little recognition and less respect. These men were fighting a war against an enemy abroad while fighting a different kind of war within their own army every single day. And yet, black regiments completed a longer stretch of the Alaska Highway than their white counterparts. Working day and night, without the machinery, without the recognition. In the same permafrost, the same mosquito swarms, the same 70 below winters, they met the same impossible standard and then exceeded it. October 25, 1942. The last gap in the highway closes northwest of Cloughan Lake, near the border of the Yukon Territory and Alaska. 2 soldiers walk toward each other from opposite ends of the final unfinished stretch. One is a black soldier from the 97th Regiment, the other is a white soldier from the 18th Engineers. They shake hands. That photograph by Corporal Refines Sims Jr. and Private Alfred Jalivka becomes the defining image of the entire project. 8 months, 1,700 miles. 4,000 black men who built a road with their bare hands while their own country refused to hand them a machine. The highway was finished. Their story was just beginning to be told. The Alaska Highway cost $140 million. It remains one of the largest cold region construction projects in human history. Today, 300,000 travelers drive it every year. In 1996, it was designated an International Historical Civil Engineering Landmark. But the real story was never about the numbers. It was about 10,000 men dropped into the most unforgiving wilderness on Earth, given an impossible deadline, and told to build. They fought the cold, the permafrost, the bears, and for 4,000 of them, their own army. They built the road anyway.